WTOP's American Nightmare podcast series, Unknown Subject, is brought to you by Simply Safe. Simply Safe Home Security is different. They keep you safe and help you save. Get 40% off Simply Safe's advanced security system, because at Simply Safe, your safety is the only thing that matters.
If you're a fan of Real Housewives, Below Deck, or any other shows on Bravo, you know that being a Bravo fan is basically a full-time job.
On the Mention It All podcast, presented by Betches Media, Dylan Hafer is keeping you up to date on all things Bravo.
Dylan is a certified Bravoholic, and each episode he breaks down the drama from the latest Bravo shows, along with the latest breaking news and social media scandals you need to know. Plus, you'll get to hear some of your favorite Bravo celebrities and media personalities mention it all about what happens on and off camera.
With new episodes 3 times a week, Mention It All is a must-listen for any Bravo fan. Just search Mention It All on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode of Unknown Subject is brought to you by Simply Save. Previously, in Episode 5 of WTOP's American Nightmare series, Unknown Subject.
I don't care if he found God and a good woman. This guy has some sick impulses.
I was going to call my buddy in cold case at midnight, and I was like, nah, he's probably asleep.
Because you're excited at this point.
I'm excited at this point. I'm like, I think I got something, but, I don't know. I haven't been doing this all that long. Some of the stuff to find is really difficult to find, and sometimes I think I got somebody up there point me in the right direction.
Yeah. I can see you're emotional about it. It's November 12th, 2019, a small South Carolina city not far from Myrtle Beach. A couple of detectives from Washington, D.C. and Montgomery County, Maryland, are working the case that has taken them far outside their regular jurisdiction. The search for the serial rapist the FBI had dubbed the Potomac River Rapist. The detectives that day were following a lead from Officer Steve Smugareski, or Smugs as he's known, who I told you about in the last episode, the officer with a talent for using genealogy to close cold cases. His work led them to a modest ranch house on Oak Log Lake Road in Conway, South Carolina, where the detectives believed they would find their unknown subject. I've already told you Smugs wasn't allowed to talk to me about his attempt to identify the Potomac River Rapist. But here's what we know about that morning in South Carolina based on public reporting at the time. There's a lot more to say about what happened that day, but for now, here's an outline. With the help of Virginia-based Parabon Nanolabs, Smugs and the detectives in the Montgomery County Police Department's cold case unit entered the rapist's DNA into a large database of profiles from people who had submitted their DNA in hopes of learning more about their family history. Smugs didn't get an exact match, but there were enough shared characteristics to suggest the names of potential relatives. From there, investigators began building out a family tree of their still unknown subject. They spent months on it. And by that November day, the detectives believed they knew the identity of the man who killed Christine Mirzayan on Canal Road in Washington, D.C. in 1998 and assaulted 8 women in Montgomery County, Maryland throughout the 90s. But they needed proof. They needed a DNA sample from the unknown subject, a man who had no idea they were coming. It wasn't known then exactly what those investigators said when the man opened the door that morning, but in the end he let them swab his cheek with a Q-tip. The detectives told the man it would take weeks to get a result, but that was a lie. They had a car standing by ready to rush the sample back to the crime lab in Montgomery County for a quick turnaround. 2 officers, including Smugs, pulled out of Conway that morning and hightailed it north with the DNA sample tucked in a manila envelope. By 4 p.m., the evidence was in the hands of the biologists at the lab. Then they waited. It took 7 hours to analyze the sample in what can be a painstaking process. Special chemicals are applied, and then it's put in a centrifuge device that heats and shakes it into a readable genetic profile. By 11 o'clock that night, their work was done. The biologist examined 24 target areas of the DNA sample, comparing it to a sample of the unknown subject from one of the 1997 rapes in Montgomery County. The calculated result? There was a 1 in 1 quadrillion chance of randomly selecting that DNA from an unrelated person in the general population. A quadrillion is 1,000 trillion, or in other words, it was a match. Back in South Carolina, in the middle of the night, officers had the house under surveillance and watched as a light came on inside the house. We only found this out later, but it's at that point the man may have been writing a letter to the woman he lived with, his fiancée. I'll tell you more about that letter later. Then the man suddenly headed for the front door, dressed in gray sweatpants and a hooded sweatshirt. Was he leaving? The officers sprang into action. Finally, 28 years after the first attack in Montgomery County and 21 years after Christine's murder, an arrest. Back in Washington, D.C., I was on a different assignment that week when I got a call from an executive producer at Fox 5, the D.C. TV station I was working for then. Police were about to hold a news conference announcing an arrest in the Mirzion case. I was stunned, surprised, and excited. My only thought was, who is it? Who did they arrest? Inside what's known as the lineup room on the 3rd floor of D.C. Police Headquarters, then D.C. Police Chief Peter Newsham stepped to the mics.
The suspect in this case attacked at least 10 women in and around Washington, D.C. His last known victim in Washington, D.C. was a 29-year-old congressional fellow who was murdered. Forensic evidence linked the man to these crimes and was instrumental in leading detectives to his location in Conway, South Carolina, where he was placed under arrest. I want to thank my colleagues at the Montgomery County Police Department, at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Washington Field Office, and our colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office for their assistance and unwavering commitment to find this man who hopefully he won't be able to terrorize another community again. I want to give a special thanks to Montgomery County Police Officer Smugareski. He's also known as Smugs. I think the chief will talk a little bit about him. Sergeant Finkelman, Detective McBean, and Detective Williams of MPD, and Sharon Donovan of the U.S. Attorney's Office. I also want to thank the team at the DNA laboratory in Montgomery County. They were able to expedite the DNA testing process that matched our suspect to these cases. Based on the investigation, 60-year-old Giles Daniel Warwick of Conway, South Carolina, was identified as a possible suspect through forensic genealogy. On Tuesday, November 12th, Warwick was arrested in Conway, South Carolina. He will be extradited to the district and charged with first-degree murder. He will also face additional charges stemming from the multiple sexual assaults that he committed.
Police said Warwick was living in Montgomery County at the time of the attacks, working at a landscaping company and as a contractor for a utility company. That gave him the ability to move around, Montgomery County Police Chief Marcus Jones said at the news conference. Suddenly it seemed like some of those puzzle pieces that had frustrated Detective Joe Madano all those years ago were falling into place. Chief Jones praised the detectives who had worked the case for so long, but he had special praise for Officer Steve Smugareski, the cop who was solving the seemingly unsolvable.
I do give special thanks to our cold case unit and Officer Smugareski, who has done some significant work in the genetic genealogy field. He has also helped us to solve a string of elder rapists that occurred in our community in the Germantown area of Montgomery County in the late early 2010, 2011 period, and he has been just bringing forth some fruitful evidence for us to be able to resolve these cases. So again, I want to thank him.
David Hackos, Christine Mirzayon's husband, also got a call from Todd Williams, the D.C. detective who was part of the task force that had been working to close the case for more than 10 years.
I was actually dropping my son off from middle school at that moment. I got the call, and I called them back, and yeah, I was in shock. It brought the whole thing back to me, because it's been a long time since Christine's death, and I have my own family now and my own very busy life. So, but it brought everything back, and I was in this state of kind of shock for about a week after that happened. But I'm so happy that they were able to catch the guy.
An investigation that took more than 28 years to close, a time span in which the two main investigators, Joe Madano in Montgomery County and Dean Comby in D.C., had already retired.
I was almost like to say ecstatic.
That's Joe Madano.
I mean, this was a case that, I had worked on it for, the better part of 20 years, probably more than that, from initially investigating these cases as current cases, and then again later on as cold cases. So, so it was probably one of the best closures that I think that I've had or I would want to have, just because of how active this guy was and how frustrating it was to catch him. So, yeah, it was good news.
Kelly, the babysitter who was attacked in 1991, says she got a heads up from a detective in the hours just before the arrest. She described the call as very surreal.
First it's just disbelief, like, really? Is it really him? Are you sure? Just all the questions, and just like shock. The detective that I spoke with was very empathetic, just very, very nice and gentle and tender, and just really, like, how are you doing? And, we really feel like 99.9% sure that this is him. And she explained to us that there was some DNA involved, and that my DNA had been cross-matched, or however they do that. So in my particular situation. And so then, yeah, you're just like, wow. And my husband and I were actually away on a little weekend anniversary trip. So, we just kind of sat there looking at each other like, wow, is this really, really happening? And then, of course, just like you had mentioned as well, the next thing you do is like pictures, and what does he look like? And, who is he? You want to know where has he been? How did he go all these years without being caught?
And when she finally saw his face,
when I looked at that picture, it's just like pure evil.
And as for Dean Comby, who had worked so hard to solve Christine's murder, well, he says he heard it on the news.
It might have been the news conference when they announced it, because I remember pulling it up on the net, looking at it, because they had pictures of The Rock in the article, and the pictures of him, Giles Warwick, and because I was looking, I was like, man, this dude never came up anywhere,
So you're looking at his mugshot.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And listening to his name.
Yeah.
And you're going,
never had anything on that dude.
Giles Warwick, once just an unknown subject, now arrested, in custody, after 28 years. But who was he? If you've thought about securing your home with home security but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, WTOP American Nightmare listeners can order the #1 rated Simply Safe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. Did you know Simply Safe was named the best home security system of 2022? Yes, by U.S. News & World Report, a third year in a row. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use Fast Protect technology, exclusively from Simply Safe, to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real, so you can get priority police response. Simply Safe is whole home security with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door. and even hazard sensors that detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 50% off any new SimpliSafe system at simplysafe.com/nightmare today. This is their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplysafe.com/nightmare. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Hi, it's Paul Wagner. In my career, I've investigated a lot of crimes and shined a light on how people can keep themselves safe. And here at WTOP's American Nightmare podcast series, there's one crime we don't talk about enough, and that's how some home security companies charge you an insane amount every month. It's highway robbery. SimpliSafe Home Security is different. They keep you safe and help you save. In fact, right now, our listeners can get 40% off SimpliSafe's advanced security system. Because at SimpliSafe, your safety is the only thing that matters.
You made it. Here, finally. Checked out of office to check into the sweet views of that place you've always wanted to go. You know the one. It's nice. Even the kids like it.
This place is so cool.
And they never like it.
Mom, can we go to the pool?
Look at that. Not even asking for the Wi-Fi. When you're with Amex, it's not if it's going to happen, but when. American Express. Don't live life without it.
By the time the Chiefs held their news conference, Giles Warwick had been behind bars in Horry County, South Carolina, for about 2 days. When he finally saw a magistrate, the 60-year-old waived extradition, and the U.S. Marshals brought him back to D.C., where he went before a judge on November 21st, 2019. I was in the courtroom that day in a miserable place called C10 in the basement of D.C. Superior Court. A room without windows where people in the gallery are forced to sit on wooden benches and wait, sometimes for hours, for a case to be called. No one except the lawyers, the judge, and the defendants are permitted to speak. I had been in C10 hundreds of times over the years, and I was willing to wait to see for myself the man who allegedly killed Christine Mirzayan in 1998 and raped Kelly that night in 1991. When Warwick finally walked out in handcuffs and leg chains, I only caught a glimpse before he turned to face the judge. As I recall, the proceedings lasted just a few minutes before the judge found probable cause, and the 60-year-old was ordered held without bond. For the rest of November, December, and January, Giles Warwick remained locked up in the D.C. jail. It wasn't until February 27, 2020, that he appeared in court again for a preliminary hearing. It was just a few short weeks before the coronavirus seemed to shut everything down in March of 2020, and life seemed to come to a screeching halt. In the District of Columbia, a person facing charges is entitled to a hearing where the defendant's attorney is permitted to cross-examine whoever prosecutors put on the witness stand, an initial probing of the evidence against them. In this case, it was Detective Todd Williams. Williams ran through the events the night of Warwick's arrest in South Carolina, telling the court about that letter Warwick wrote to his fiancée. Police found it in his kitchen. It was tucked in between 2 boxes of freezer bags. The letter said, "I'm so sorry this ended this way. I left you in a mess. I never meant for this to happen. All I wanted to do is love you. Please forgive me. Please don't cry." The letter ended with, "All my junk is yours." Judge Todd Edelman said the letter was consciousness of guilt, evidence that Giles Warwick knew he was guilty, and ordered Warwick held without bond until trial. I have a vivid memory of being in the courtroom that day, specifically because of the way Giles Warwick was acting. He had a smirk on his face that, as I recall, never went away. It was chilling. When I spoke with David Hackos for this podcast, it was nearly a year after Giles Warwick had been arrested. We were wrapping up the interview when his wife Lauren joined the Zoom call. You'll hear more from her later. David has rebuilt his life on the West Coast, marrying Lauren, with whom he now has 2 children, 8 and 12 years old. David and Lauren had clearly been following the case, but were interested in learning more about the man who was charged in Christine's murder.
It's shocking to me that he was in a relationship with someone, that he was able to reinvent himself somehow. Like, how did it go from what happened to Christine to where he was when they found him?
Yeah. Well, what we know is that he was married to a woman and living in a very nice house in Iamsville, Maryland, in Frederick County. I'm still digging into where he had been after 1998, and what he was doing. I'm trying to do some more investigating on that. There's a lot I don't know. Since I've started working on this podcast, I've tried to learn as much as I could about Giles Warwick. Let me start with the woman Warwick was living with when he was arrested in 2019. Online records show she ran a bookkeeping business out of a home Warwick owned in Iamsville, Maryland, before the two moved to Conway, South Carolina, where they purchased a home in June of 2018. Although I know her name, we've decided not to use it in this podcast because she's not charged with a crime. But I wanted to know if she would talk to me, and so in the summer of 2020, I gave her a call.
Hello?
Oh, hi. This is Paul Wagner calling. I'm trying to reach... She politely told me she had no comment and told me to reach out to Warwick's lawyer. That was the first of what would be many dead ends as I tried to dig further into Giles Warwick's background. Some people who knew him wouldn't talk to me. Others ignored my letters and emails. Some agreed to talk on background as long as I did not reveal their names. And I was able to learn quite a bit about the man from court records and other online databases. This is what I've learned. According to a family member who asked not to be identified, Giles Warwick was born in October of 1959 and never knew his father. He spent his childhood in Oxon Hill and Fort Washington, Maryland, where he attended Friendly High School. Fort Washington is an unincorporated section of Prince George's County near the Potomac River. Prince George's County borders Washington, D.C. In January of 1980, Warwick became a father for the first time. It was a boy. He would later father 3 more children with another woman, a woman we are only calling Alita, a woman he got to know through friends in the neighborhood where they lived. Court records show Warwick and Alita never married and had a rocky relationship. More on that in a minute. According to that family member, at the time he made his living working for a towing company and driving trucks. Court records also show Warwick getting into trouble when he was in his mid-20s. In June of 1984, he was found guilty of battery in Prince George's County, but the records are so old and incomplete, it's unclear what sentence he received. In February of 1986, Warwick was charged in Prince George's County with assault and battery. But the court records show it was placed on stet, or inactive. Again, the case is so old it's unclear why. And then in September of 1991, 4 months after Montgomery County Police began investigating the first rape, Warwick was charged in Prince George's County with theft, where he was given probation before judgment. PBJ, as lawyers call it, allows a person convicted of a crime to have their conviction expunged if they successfully complete their probation. In March of 1992, court records show, Warwick went on trial in Prince George's County for theft. He was found guilty and spent some time in jail. By then, Montgomery County Police Detective Joe Madonna was investigating 5 rapes he believed were carried out by the same man. Now, back to that rocky relationship. According to a family member, Alita and Giles Warwick began dating in 1985, and by 1990, they were both living in Montgomery County. At times, they lived together in Potomac on Prairie Landing Court, but it wasn't, quote, very traditional. Warwick also had an apartment on Mahogany Drive in Gaithersburg, addresses that are located in the same area of Montgomery County where the women were being attacked. Sometime in the 90s, Warwick began a landscaping company he called Giles Land and Lawn, an occupation Detective Joe Madonna always thought would have been one of those jobs that gave the rapist access to the neighborhoods where he could blend in and go unnoticed. By then, court records show he and Alita were fighting over child support and custody. An affidavit for a search warrant for Warwick's home in South Carolina also says Alita filed for a protective order in 1996 when Alita says Warwick cut the cable to her house and began banging on her door. She let him inside, where he attacked her with a knife, but she was able to get away unharmed. According to a family member, Warwick and Alita ended their relationship in 1997. Court records show Warwick was accused of domestic violence in July of 1997, and in August, Alita filed for a protective order. That same month, the two filed lawsuits against each other. Warwick filed for custody of his children, while Alita filed a claim for child support. He lost, and she won. In fact, the judge in the case found Warwick in contempt of court and ordered him to pay Alita $4,872 and sentenced him to 30 days in jail. A source familiar with the matter says Warwick spent no more than a day in jail after paying what he owed. In the year the lawsuit was being litigated in court and the relationship was apparently breaking down, came the final attacks carried out by the Potomac River rapist. The attack on the cell biologist in Silver Spring in November of 1997, and the killing of Christine Mirzion in August of 1998. I wondered if there could be a tie-in between the battles Giles Warwick was having with Alita and the rapes and murder in 1997 and 1998. I talked about this with Brad Garrett, a former profiler with the FBI and a legendary crime fighter in Washington, D.C.
Sure. I mean, the case that I can think of is Gary Ridgway, the Green River killer. So Gary, who was married 3 times, but the first 2 marriages were both apparently quite difficult. A lot of controversy, a lot of issues. And if you look at the volume of crimes he committed, it seems they generally fell into when he was involved in those 2 difficult relationships. Because let's face it, people who attack women, it's all about anger, resentment, revenge against women for a complexity of reasons as to why they... But so it would sort of make sense. He's in a relationship, he's angry about it, it's difficult, and so he vents it.
You may know Brad from ABC News, where he works as an analyst on major crime stories, or you may know him as the agent who captured Miramal Kazi, the terrorist who opened fire with a rifle outside the CIA in 1993, killing 2 and wounding 3 others. I've known Brad for about 25 years. If you work the crime beat here in Washington, D.C. like I do, you tend to get to know the people working high-profile cases. In February of 2022, we sat down for an interview at his D.C. home.
There could be some sort of tie between what's going on domestically and the volumes of crimes serial offenders commit their crimes. Because, let's face it, serial offenders they're interesting because they can literally, what I would call, live in like parallel universes. In other words, they can, and I can think of a number of serial rape cases I've worked where the person is married, he has kids, he has a job, and he goes out and commits these horrible acts. He comes back home, he goes to bed for a while, he gets up, he feeds his kids, he makes their lunch, he sends them to school, he kisses his wife, she goes to work, he goes to work, whatever it might be, and then because of his own compulsions and desires and so forth and fantasies to commit these horrible acts, he gets up and does it again at some point. So because their minds are so unique, because they can think in ways of, do they really have empathy? Well, they must have some empathy the way they're treating, in this example I just gave, their own child and their wife. But they can also then have no empathy, no feelings, no caring, and they're overwhelmed by their own compulsions and desires and fantasies to commit these acts. And for the rest of it, it's just like, how could you do that? And that's because everything's in boxes and is in their head, basically. And they can run up and down these tracks and jump from one to the other. And the rest of us have a block in between, like, you may think horrible things about, but you never act on them. And clearly, this type of offender does.
I guess it's probably the most intriguing part of the story, in at least my mind, is that it just ends. I mean, there's these horrible, awful crimes connected by DNA, allegedly carried out by this guy, and then they just stop. How unusual is that?
Well, I don't think unusual is the right word. I do think that offenders that stay alive, don't go to prison, but they reach a certain age and they reach a certain sort of stable platform in their life, relationships, job-wise, etc. And I think maybe the biggest thing is the physical ability and maybe even the desirability to do it because of testosterone, etc. Then they stop. And so it doesn't make sense on some levels, but there are enough examples of people that have done that. Another one that comes to mind is Dennis Rader. The BTK
killer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the BTK killer, committed these acts from like the mid-70s up to about 91, and then he stopped. And then, he got himself caught, basically, because he starts interacting and sending letters, and they figure out who he is, and they go back and charge him for all these things that he had committed back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so he's another example. So it's really not that uncommon. I would be willing to bet if we could pull up serial rape cases, even in the Washington metropolitan area, and look at the unsolved ones, if in fact we could figure out who the offender was, and if it's tied to a serial case, they may be living around here, have a job. I mean, again, that ability to lead these sort of parallel lives, and where in effect the autoerotic compulsion side maybe is still there, but not to the degree it was 5, 10, 15 years before that.
It seems surprising to me, but according to Brad Garrett, it wasn't all that unusual for a serial rapist, one who doesn't wind up in prison or dead, to reach a certain age and then just stop. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Unfortunately, life doesn't come with a user manual, so when it's not working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient, secure, and accessible anywhere. I'm not afraid to admit I went for help recently when a traumatic event I experienced as a teenager came back to haunt me. Talking with someone allowed me to ease the stress I was under and give me advice on how to cope with it. Everyone deserves to feel their best. BetterHelp makes it easier to get started. All of the benefits of in-person therapy, plus it's more convenient, more accessible, and more affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. Get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/American Nightmare. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/American Nightmare. What makes a person a murderer? Are they born to kill, or are they made to kill? Killer Psyche Daily is a new podcast that gives you a quick 10-minute rundown every weekday on the motivations and behaviors of the criminal masterminds, psychopaths, and cold-blooded killers you read about in the news. Host Candice DeLong draws on her years as an FBI agent and criminal profiler to break down the cases for you. On Killer Psyche Daily, Candice will give you insights into cases like Ryan Grantham and the newly arrested Stockton serial killer. She will also invite expert guests to dive deeper into the details. share what it's like to work at Quantico, answer some killer trivia, and even host virtual Q&As that allow you to ask her questions. I've known a lot of FBI agents over the years, and I've been to Quantico. It's a very interesting place. And I can tell you these profilers, these FBI profilers, really know their stuff. Hey, Prime members, listen to the Amazon Music exclusive podcast Killer Psyche Daily in the Amazon Music app. Download the app today. I've already told you Giles Warwick, the man police say is the Potomac River rapist, started his own landscaping business in the 90s called Giles Land and Lawn. In 1997, Warwick also took a job with a small construction company in Rockville, Maryland called Utility Systems C&E, an outfit that laid conduits underground, sometimes digging up streets or running cables from manhole to manhole. It's owned by a man named Michael Niacani and his wife, Mickey. Mr. Niacani declined to speak with me about Warwick. He didn't offer an explanation. However, I did find a man who worked at Utility Systems who knew Warwick fairly well. Gary Gill was the operations manager for the company. He remembers the day of the news conference in November of 2019, the day police announced they had arrested the Potomac River rapist. Gill was in the company office when someone called to say, "Turn on the TV."
Yeah, we're sitting in the office. We have a large TV screen that we use for our computer. So we bring up our spreadsheets and plans, etc. Somebody called into the office about 5 after 5. Michael picked up the phone and I guess they told him, yeah, turn on the TV. You're going to want to see what's on TV. Sure enough, there was Giles all over the television, and we were shocked. People were just, oh my God, could not believe it. And then even friends of Michael's or people that he's done business with were calling in, and it was just a major shocker.
And what did Michael Niacani say? Because apparently he employed him for quite a long time.
Michael is a tight-lipped guy.
Maybe that's why he won't talk to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's other things too, but I don't know. I have no idea about their relationship. I know, as I think I told you before, that Giles used to go over to Michael's house and do landscape work and do work around the house. Also, in the house were Michael's wife and 2 daughters were. So that was one of the first things that came out of Michael's mouth. He said, "I can't believe it. He was in my house."
Gary Gill says he and Warwick talked daily, discussing the work that had to be done.
I mean, to me, it still doesn't compute. I don't understand. I never saw any of this from him, from my experience. And I worked with him for 5-6 years. So I never saw that. I mean...
So when you heard about the crimes he allegedly committed, and then you tried to square it with the man you knew, what'd you think?
I didn't get it. I mean, I tried to reason how it could happen, but I did think that, all right, he does seem like the guy that's holding back some sort of frustration or some anger or something, but I never saw him grab someone or get violent or not even, he wouldn't even say an expletive to somebody in the field. He would turn around and walk away. He might, I saw him get a little bit angry, but he would never I never saw him saw him get close to a physical confrontation. Never, ever. And he was a big guy. He was a strong guy.
Yeah, describe his build.
I think he was probably 6 feet, about 220. I know they used to lift weights a lot in his house, but he was big arms and chest. Not a real overly bulky guy. He was a fit guy.
Gill says he remembers the day he and Giles met for the first time.
When I was hired, I went that next morning, the start time, and go to the field, to the shop, where all the guys, they start the cruise and then leave every morning from the shop.
And he was there as a...
He was kind of the director of field operations. So, like, every day there would be instructions, or he would answer questions to get the field guys in the vehicles, have the right materials, and then go to each respective job.
So he was basically a supervisor?
Yes.
So
yeah.
he had an important job there with the company?
Yes.
And he'd been there for a while, hadn't he?
Yeah, when I got there, he was one of the longest employees. He had been there for, I was told, for over 15 years when I got there.
Yeah. Gary Gill says Warwick was making a good living. In the shop one day, he says he came across one of Warwick's pay stubs and estimates he was making around $150,000 a year.
He seemed like he was a self-made guy. He may not have been well educated. Maybe had a bad life, but he learned and he moved up the line. And I mean, I respected him for that, but I had no idea of his history. I met his son. I know he had a daughter. He spent lavishly on both of them.
Describe his personality.
He was pretty calm. He was a cool guy. He would joke around a little bit. Talk with sports on a couple days with the guys. I didn't get to know him real well, but I mean he had his hobbies of, I mean, from what I understand, he spent a lot of time with his family, his girlfriend, and then he had a whole bunch of toys like motorcycles, what are these four-wheel drive ATVs, stuff like that. He spent a lot of money on his free time.
In 2004, property tax records show Warwick purchased a single-family home on a large plot of land in Iamsville, Maryland, a rural community in Frederick County, about 40 miles outside of Washington, D.C. He paid a little over $350,000. After Warwick's arrest, reporters had a difficult time getting neighbors to talk. None of them would talk to me, but one neighbor did speak with NBC4's Darcy Spencer.
Yes, I did speak by phone with a neighbor of his in Iamsville. This person did not want to have their name used or appear on camera or anything like that, so it was really just a background interview over the phone. But he was telling me that neighbors were astonished. They knew this guy. They called him a gentle giant. He would attend barbecues, neighborhood barbecues. He would do things for people. He was like people might say, living in plain sight. They never suspected that he would have committed any kind of crime, and generally viewed as a good guy, a good neighbor. So they were really shocked. And when you find out something like that about someone, and again, he's a suspect at this point, you start to think back. Was there anything that he did that may have triggered something, or thinking back? And really, they couldn't think of anything that would remotely cause them suspicion, or especially suspicion of committing a series of crimes like these. So yeah, I feel, based on the one interview I did, that he was well regarded in the neighborhood and that he was considered to be a good neighbor, and they were absolutely in shock to hear that he was arrested for these crimes.
A good neighbor, a supervisor in an important position making good money. It seems like those who knew him in his later years would never have considered Giles Warwick a possible serial rapist. But there is one place Warwick's name did turn up. Remember that list of possible suspects Detective Joe Madano built from a list of construction workers and contractors? A process he described as being like trying to find a needle in a haystack. I've always wondered if Giles Warwick was one of those needles. Well, In my research for this podcast, I've combed through hundreds of pages of court documents. Buried inside one of them is a surprising revelation. In fact, it's the search warrant detectives got to search Warwick's home in Conway, South Carolina. In the affidavit, police wrote that Warwick's name was on the suspect list all the way back in 1992. At the time the list was compiled, Warwick could not be ruled out. But Giles Daniel Warwick, it went on to say, did not have a DNA sample on file in the state of Maryland. That means that just a year after the attacks began, the name of the unknown subject was known to police. What we don't know is how many names were on the suspect list. Maybe it was hundreds, or maybe police were looking into other potential leads, but there's nothing to indicate detectives ever spoke to him. Joe Madano is certain of that. Coming up in episode 7, remember that letter I told you about? The one police found in Warwick's house the morning he was arrested? The one addressed to his fiancée? Well, here's a little more of what he had to say. Warwick wrote, "Please forgive me. Please. You are my love, and it's been that way since the day we met. All the titles have been signed, so a couple of grand is better than nothing. Missing you. All the mess you are about to go through. I hope you don't hate me." Season 3 of WTOP's American Nightmare series has been written by me, Paul Wagner, with editorial assistance from Jack Moore, Julia Ziegler, and Craig Schwab. This episode would not be possible without the help of Dean Comby, Joe Madano, Kelly, David Hackos, Brad Garrett, Gary Gill, and Darcy Spencer. Reporting and production of this podcast was supported by a grant from Spotlight DC, Capital City Fund for Investigative Journalism. For grants, please apply to spotlightdc.org. Our show relies on people like you leaving ratings and reviews on Apple to help us climb the podcast charts and attract new listeners. We hope if you do like what you hear, you will take a minute to do so. If you have questions or comments about the show, send us an email through our website, AmericanNightmarePodcast.com. We are also on Twitter and Facebook at AM Nightmare Pod. The music in the show is Ethereal Thoughts by Olive Musique and Steadfast by Moments. And as always, thanks for listening.
He knows you once ate an entire sheet cake. He knows your selfie life isn't your real life. He knows what goes down on the DMs. Shouldn't you know your dog better? Now you can learn his inner secrets with Embark, the highest-rated dog DNA test. Unlocking over 350 breeds and screening for over 215 genetic health risks. Go to EmbarkVet.com and use promo code DNA, that's DNA, to get $60 off an Embark Breed and Health Kit or Purebred Kit with free shipping. That's promo code DNA to save today.
This holiday, whether you're making a Baker's Simple Truth turkey for 40 or a Murray's Baked Brie for 2, Baker's has fast, fresh delivery and free pickup, so you can make holiday meals that bring you all together to create memories that last. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Free pickup on orders of $35 or more. Restrictions may apply.
And right now, you can save when you shop your faves. Just buy 6 or more participating sale items and save 50 cents each with your card. Baker's, fresh for everyone.
This is Claudia's O'Reilly Auto Parts.